Welcome to Music Matters 2020. I'm your host, Jason Tramm. We're delighted that you can join our unique podcast community, and especially this evening as we have a wonderful show with Dr. Gordon Turk joining us here, actually live for a change. This is new for us. We're delighted you can be here. Please remember to hit the subscribe button below and hit that bell icon for the most up-to-date information on upcoming guests and topics. Like our videos and share them. Help us grow our community. And remember to chat in questions as you become part of the conversation. We're delighted that you're here today, and thank you so much. Welcome, Gordon Turk.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So let's start with your background. How did you first start playing the organ, and take us through your artistic journey?
Well, as a child, I wanted to play the organ, which seems like a strange thing, except that my father was a minister in church. So I was around church all the time, and it was the sound of the organ that intrigued me. And I think it was the fact that it had not only keyboards for your hands, but a keyboard for your feet.
Did you start on the piano first?
Yes, because when at 5 was when I started, but I couldn't reach the pedals at that point. Anyway, and I was too small. And fortunately for me, the first teachers that I encountered said, you really need piano background first. So that's what I did. And when I was 10, I then had 5 years of piano under my belt. I continued piano, and then I also started studying the organ. And that was from then on, from about the age of 12, then I really focused on the organ from then on and been studying it ever since.
Yes, and by study, you practice. We've worked together for 14 years at Ocean Grove, and I've been watching your practice schedule for 14 years, and there's very few people I know who are as dedicated to their instruments as you. You really put in a good, I would say, 3-4 hours a day, almost every day.
Actually, most of the practicing I do is under the radar. I do it on very quiet stops here, just to build in privacies, and so that people, I'm not annoying the neighborhood too. So I'm practicing many hours a day, and more than the 3 or 4. And you have to work in a productive way, because if you over practice, that's not a good thing. But it takes, for the job that we do here, that you and I work with together, there is so much preparation, and performing twice a week in recitals alone is sort of a life's work. Plus, we have the Sunday services, and we have the choir rehearsals, and we have special choral events. So
here at Ocean Grove, for people who may not know on the call, at the Ocean Grove Great Auditorium, where Gordon is the organist in residence, and how long have you been on the job, Gordon?
Since 1974. I've been here every summer since then. I came with the idea of being here, I'll try it out for a year or two, and that was started, and then it just began to grow, and I became so interested in the instrument, which was only a shadow at that point, a fraction of where we are today with the instrument. So it's over this period of time, I've not only been involved in all of the musical requirements, but have seen the instrument grow from something that was a kind of historical anomaly. It had some historical interest, but it wasn't really that large. Had some big pipes in it, but it wasn't a large assemblage of pipes. And it's grown to be one of the largest pipe organs in the world. And it's not just the size, it's the versatility and that and the quality of the sound that makes it so special and makes it a thrill to play.
So let's go back in time. So you started playing the organ around 12. What was the next step for you?
Well, I continued. I really focused organ at 12. And then I was fortunate to be introduced to Alexander McCurdy, who was a legendary teacher and performer. And I met him when I was a sophomore in high school, and I asked him if I could come and audition for him and play for him. So he said yes, and he immediately said, what are you going to play? And I said, well, I think I'll play a Franck chorale. What else? I think I'll play a Passacaglia. What else? I said, I'll have to think about what else. So he did take me on as a student. He didn't have take private students because he taught at the Curtis Institute and also at Westminster Choir College. So he didn't have time to do any of the teaching. But he said, I'll make time for you, and he did. And then when I finished high school, I was accepted at the Curtis Institute, and so I was able to continue to study with him. And I studied with him for 2.5 years while in high school, and then went on to continue with him at Curtis.
What an incredible... I've only known him by reputation, of course, but tell me about what did you learn from Alexander McCurdy? What were some things you learned from this great master organist?
Well, he taught not only notes, and he taught repertoire. But he taught things about music, getting into the music, getting underneath the surface, and let it get beneath your own skin so that something came out. And of all the students that he had, he never had a formula for this student that everyone had to fit. He was very conscious of the individual and how he could help them to achieve musical goals and how to grow as a musician. And he was always interested in the personality behind the performer and to bringing life to it.
What was the Curtis atmosphere like for a young musician? That's one of the premier musical institutions in the country, and if not the world. What did you learn? What were some of the colleagues around you, and what are some of the lessons learned there those times?
Well, it's a very small school, and they're extremely competitive, everything about it, getting in there and being there, and you have to maintain a standard once you're there. The organ department was small. There were 7 students, I think, when I went, and at the highest it ever reached, I think, was 9, and most often now it's anywhere from 4 to 6 students. So first of all, there's a lot of individual attention, but we had to we were required to continue to study piano, so with one of the teachers there at the school. And I was fortunate that I could study with Vladimir Sokolov, who was an incredible accompanist and pianist and wonderful talent. And then, of course, we had all of the theory courses, the harmony courses, and all those things. And one of my teachers, it's kind of stunning to think about it, was Robert Levin, who is the great scholar and Mozart scholar in particular, informer. And I had him for theory class, and he had just come to America. Nadia Boulanger sent him over to teach at Curtis. So I had him in the first year or 2 that he was there to school. But the school was intense, and what I liked about it was the atmosphere of, it was small enough that everyone could have a sense of what other people were doing, and you could be involved in a sense in what they were doing. Sometimes I'd be walking down the hall and a singer would see me and say, do you have 10 minutes? Can you accompany something for me? I'd like to sing this with accompaniment. So I got used to having to do a lot of sight reading and accompanying of singers on the spur of the moment. And then, of course, working with other organists who were around. We had organ classes every week, twice a week, in addition to organ lessons, which were private lessons. But then the class, everyone came together and we had to perform for each other. But the other thing about the class that was stimulating and terrifying was that people knew that this class existed, and we would have famous people drop in.
Of course.
We had great pianists and orchestra conductors, opera singers. All people came in because the new organ class was taking place, and we always had to perform and be prepared to perform twice a week, always from memory, and regardless of who was there. So that was part of the intensity, and of course this prepares you for opportunities to be a professional performer. If that's what you're trying to do, this really sets you up. It's also intimidating because you have all these magnificent talents around you, and it's competitive, but it was also stimulating. I think one of my favorite experiences of it was that almost any day of the week I could go and hear a chamber group playing a concert. They had concerts at 5 o'clock, and in Curtis Hall. And so I would hear singers, I would hear chamber players, instrumentalists, sometimes it's the orchestra, and those were all aspects of the playing. Later on, some years ago, not that long ago, I was playing at the Bolshoi Philharmonic in St. Petersburg, Russia. And I thought it was one of the most terrifying experiences of my life in terms of nerves. Wow. But I thought, my goodness, here I am in Russia. This is a school that has a close association with the Curtis Institute and that tradition. A lot of teachers came from there to there, and it was this ongoing tradition. And I thought, here I am about to step out on the stage of Tchaikovsky, of Prokofiev, of Rachmaninoff, and all these people in the Russia. And I'm either going to walk out onto the stage and faint, or else I'm going to walk out and have the time of my life. And I decided to do that, and I had a wonderful.
What was the program?
The program was Bach, of course, and César Franck. I did some other French romantic composers, some other Baroque things. I think I handled transcription that I did. Some contemporary pieces. Oh, I played the Adagio for Strings of Barber, my own transcription of it for organ. And that was interesting for people because they didn't know that music as well.
Oh, interesting, okay.
And I did the same thing when I was in Ukraine, where they knew even less about American music. And they had never heard, I was playing in Kiev, and they hadn't heard of Barber's Adagio for Strings, and they were fascinated by it. And
it's interesting when we take American music that's so famous in our sphere, but when we go into the country, I had a similar experience. I did Porgy and Bess in Albania, and that the orchestra had no idea what to do with that style. I was there for a month, so I got to really teach them American jazz.
Yes.
And some of those kinds of. Same with the overture to Candide. I did it in Romania. And that's pops music for us in America, but not in Romania apparently. But it was fun to be, and in the end, they wound up loving it. They wound up.
How did you work? Did you have an interpreter?
Yeah, in both places.
Yeah. And
it was funny because in Albania, I would say something, and I don't know if they understood me, and they would say something, and I have no. It was like a game of telephone, like. But they understood this and they understood that. So by the end,
Well, when I was in the. Last time I was performing in Ukraine, I've been there a couple times on concert tours, I was playing with an orchestra. I can't remember the name of the city. It was a really good orchestra and wonderful conductor. No one spoke English in the group, and I didn't have an interpreter. And I was playing the Poulenc Concerto for organ and orchestra. They didn't know it, so they were thrilled to have the opportunity to learn this music. And the timpanist, however, spoke German, and I speak enough German that we could communicate, and that's how we communicated in the rehearsals and the thing. And then I had one of those moments that people remember for years. In the performance itself, we were playing the Poulenc Concerto, and near the end, as you and I have done it a few times now, and at the very end, you noted that wonderful viola solo.
Yes, gorgeous.
Just before the very end, just as I was playing the little interludes that precede that section, I heard a pop and the principal violist had a string break, and they panicked. And I could just see, and I glanced at the conductor, and he looked at me and had this look, and I just nodded my head that I understood. Something like so. I took those interludes and I stretched them, and look. And in the meantime, I saw the instrumentalist passing instruments across. And then they gave the downbeat, and she came. And afterwards, the violist came up to me, and the only word she could say in English was "Thank you."
That's all we need to know. That's one of the great things about being a performer is some of that part of it that is never what you expect. Live performance is always living in the moment. That's what makes it so interesting. And stories we never forget are those type of stories.
Right. That's the thing that's so great about live music. And going back to Alexander McCurdy, that was something that he was particularly interested in. He didn't like recorded music. One time he got into my car. Drove to school, and I was driving him to a place where I was going to have he wanted to listen to me play the organ for rehearsal, a rehearsal listening for recital I was going to do. So I picked him up in my car, and I had the classical music station on. I had been while I was driving. He got in and he said, "Turn that off." Oh. He said, "I don't like canned music." And he wants to talk one-on-one. Wow. But that is the great thing about live music.
I don't think people realize how recent a phenomenon recorded music is. If we look in the history of music, it's not until like the early 1900s that it was even possible. Right. So before that, there was only people playing themselves and people going to concerts, and it's really a phenomenon that I have to explain this to my undergraduates that before it wasn't even a thing. Like we had to make music for each other and.
What's a Mozart divertimento? It's people got together and they played while people were having dinner and maybe a soiree of some sort, or after dinner, the entertainment of the evening was that they'd have a string quartet or the court orchestra, if it was at a court, and that is a prince's court, not a civil court, or whatever. And people got together and they made music. And then in more recent times, when people had pianos in their homes, and also for a long time in the late 19th and early 20th century, people had pump organs. And there was a rash of them built from like 1870s to 1920s or whatever. And people had them in their homes. And they played them, and they sang to them. And then later, if you see some of the old magazines in which you look, old etudes and other magazines, you'll see families sitting around a radio, listening to a radio show, and that was usually live music. That wasn't taped. So it's interesting, and it's unpredictable because you never know what's going to happen. But you have that little edge because it's live. That makes it very special. That
adrenaline rush that's always there in live music, right? It's what makes it so much fun, is to feel that kind of energy. And it's pretty amazing. I'm getting ready to teach that to my students. I do music in like a general survey course, and I really enjoy that because a lot of the students have no experience with music at all. So it's really kind of very little. They've heard it all their lives. I tell them, you've heard all of these things. If you've watched a movie with a soundtrack, they steal from all the great artists. They steal from all the great styles. They borrow selectively to get emotions across, whether it's expressionistic music of Schoenberg or whether it's sweeping romanticism of Tchaikovsky. It's all there, always.
Yeah.
So that's my goal, is to unlock them, that all the styles. You just don't know how to describe them or talk about them. So I just think it's fascinating. Like that's how we talk about the pump organs. That's when music exploded into the middle class, and the middle class wanted to join in the conversation. We see pianos in homes, spinet pianos in homes, pump organs in houses, choral societies exploding all over Europe, and then the United States.
And the piano made that possible too, and that cryptic, idiosyncratic individual, Charles Ives, used to poke fun at the local music clubs that people had, and where people learned to play. They learned things like Beethoven's sonatas, Beethoven's symphonies, by doing four hands versions of them, and that's a lot of people in America became acquainted with orchestral music because there weren't orchestras for a long time in our country's national history. But then he made a very funny, cryptic remark later on. He was an irritable person, and as irritable, I think, as he was idiosyncratic. And he referred to some of these music clubs as, particularly the women's or girls' music clubs, as bevies of beauties doing their damnedest.
That sounds like Ives, yeah.
And that was, not very flattering and not very supportive.
What a fascinating individual. He's actually a very well-respected insurance salesman. He actually wrote a best-selling book on insurance. Like he wrote I was conducting his Psalm 90, and I was researching to him, and I knew his music. I've sung it. I know his, of course, Unanswered Question and things like that. And what an incredible individual. People who respected him included Arnold Schoenberg, Gustav Mahler. I mean, people who were like disciples of him while he was selling insurance. Isn't that incredible? That he inspired these great artists, and he did something totally
And
there.
he lived in New York City, and he lived somewhere up around, I think it was 75th Street or something, at the time, which was considered the suburbs at that time. It was country, the area that now is, that's just jam-packed with apartment houses, used to be cattle grazing, and he commuted from there to downtown doing his work there as in the insurance salesman, and then, of course, writing musical.
He was also directing a church choir.
Yes.
And they constructed the Psalm 90, which was never performed in his lifetime. It was the hardest thing. It's got some of the most incredible passages of choral music. And I did it a couple seasons ago, and it was one of those things that takes the choir, like, it divides up into like 20 parts, and it's all very dissonant in parts, and it talks about the angry wrath of God, and it gets very chromatic and almost 12 tone, and just fascinating writing. Nothing else like it. And they found it in fragmentary evidence, and his wife said that it was the only piece of his that he really liked.
Huh.
Doesn't that sound like Ives? Like,
yes,
fascinating
it certainly
character.
does. Yeah, I remember the first time I heard those pieces, the Philadelphia Orchestra doing them, and I think it was the Singing Cities Chorale at that time. It was a long time ago. But my sister was telling me just yesterday, I was talking to her, she's a singer, and she said that when she was a student at Westminster, her sophomore year, she was selected with a group. We were talking about solfege and about movable do or fixed do, and I was talking how important it is a skill that it develops for singers and for all musicians. We were required to do lots of really strict classes in solfege at Curtis, and we had to work on all 7 clefs, and we were all doing it all the time. Well, anyway, she said that she thinks that's one of the things that helped her, because her second year, right out of the chute, they were doing a special work of the Psalm 90 of Ives, and it was, I think it was Robert Wagner who was conducting this, and he had quartets from 10 schools in the U.S. One of them was Westminster, and my sister was one of those who she was asked to sight read something. She sight read it, and she bing, 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 and they said, "You can do the Ives," and they put her in the quartet, and she was the youngest one. All the others were seniors. But it was because of her sight reading ability that she was able to sing that stuff. And boy, you have
I taught that to my choral society. The first 3 months, they didn't want to talk to me. I put that in the same program as the Carmina Burana. I knew everyone loves Carmina Burana. That was the second half of the program. But I said the Ives is even more important to me. And by the end, you could hear a pin drop after we finished. It's got that incredible chorale at the end, and then it just fades into the mist. And the chorus is in, I think the piano's playing, the organ's playing in C major, and there's bells playing in a different key, and the chorus is singing a chorale over it's just the most stunning music. And at the end, no one clapped, everyone just stood there, and most people, that was their favorite piece. Everyone loves Carmina, but I figured no matter what, even if the Ives is a total bust, people will love the Carmina, but people love the Ives. I remember singing it in New York when I was a young singer, and it made an impression on me that this music is so powerful.
Well, it's so quirky that people will sometimes just not take the time to get acquainted with it, and when they do, then they find that it hits you at various levels. There's a lot about it that's hits you at the mental level, intellectual level. That's has to be, because it's such intellectualized music.
I had to explain to everyone in the first 4 bars, the organ chords, it says man's wrath against God's wrath against sin. He gives characterizations of each of the chords that form the roadmap for the rest of the piece. Unless you know that, it's just some odd random chords, then you have to see how that fits together.
Well, he did that collection of 110 songs for singers, and I did a paper on him when I was doing my doctoral work that involved focusing on the vocal songs, some of the vocal songs, I think. So I had a wonderful soprano that I knew who used to sing here at Ocean Grove, Judith Pannell, gorgeous soprano voice, and she was always looking for an interesting challenge. So I asked her to participate with me in the presentation of this program when I did it, this work at Manhattan School of Music. And we focused on different periods of of Ives' writing. When he started out, a lot of his music sounded like Brahms.
Yeah, he was certainly a late romantic, yeah.
Yes, and then as it evolved to where he went, the song that I remembered the most was one, I cannot remember the title of it now, but it did everything in reverse. It came to the full climax of the piece was in the first measure. It started there, and with this incredible complexity and explosion of sound. The piano accompaniment was one of the hardest things I've ever played, and then it went from there. It kept condensing, and coming down, and then the singer came in, and there was the second climax of the piece, and everything condensed from there to an end. And it had something to do with poetry that had referred somewhat to, I think, the atomic bomb, and they're talking about the end of civilization. It was very strange poetry, and things just whimpering and going off and faded. So the whole piece sort of exploded, and it was all the aftermath of it going
Fascinating.
to finally ended in a whimper.
Pretty amazing stuff.
Yeah.
So you finished your undergrad at Curtis. What was next?
After that, I spent 2 years in the Army as the organist at West Point Military Academy.
How did you wind up doing that?
Well, I had to because it was the end of the Vietnam War. I was that young, that age, and I was A1 material, and I was drafted. And I knew I would be drafted. So this job became available at West Point, and they had a competition, you had to audition by competitive audition. I got the job. So they said, in order to get the job, which it will be a 2-year military obligation will be fulfilled, and if you volunteer to be drafted. Well, I knew I'd be drafted, and I would have been drafted 6 weeks later anyway, it turned out, because they had a lottery number and my number came up. So I spent 2 years at West Point after basic training. I was up there working as an organist and choral director, and it was a great experience. I had a great time.
They have a famous organ up there, don't they?
In the Cadet Chapel, there
right.
are 4 chapels, at least 4 chapels on the Academy grounds. My main work was at the chapel that was the family chapel for the staff, the faculty of West Point. And that's where I had my main work, which had a lovely Aeolian Skinner organ. But I also did the Christmas music at the Cadet Chapel, which is the famous one.
Sure.
Monster instrument.
Yeah.
And then I had a great time while I was there. After that, when I came back to normal life, it was a year after that I think that I auditioned for this job here in Ocean Grove. And then a year later, I started at the church job where I played the other 9 months a year in an Episcopal church, where I'm the choral director and organist, and in Wayne, Pennsylvania. And I go back there in 2 weeks after we finish here. I've been there ever since.
Wow.
So it was after that I began studying while here. A few years later, I was always interested in improvisation. And in the field of organ, improvisation is something that's practiced historically in every country of Western music, but especially in France. Through the 19th century, it was maintained. In the other countries, it was just sort of forgotten. I became very interested in it. So I became acquainted with McNeill Robinson, who was a teacher in New York, and he was noted as being one of the premier improvisers in the country. And I talked with several different teachers and people in New York one day when I was up there making a trip to talk about this. And every one of them that I talked to said, while you're in New York, you should talk to McNeill Robinson. So I thought I can take a hint, and I called him and I arranged a time, and I met and worked with him. It went into a study of improvisation, and the way we studied it was to actually study the forms of composition. And the people you mentioned, the books that we used were the fundamentals of musical composition by Schoenberg. And you think that would be something that would be way out in left field. It's not. It's actually based on the studies of the works of Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven in particular, and then coming to more contemporaries, and then also craft of musical composition by Hindemith, and then coming into Alan Fort and vector analysis and study, which is really rarefied stuff. I was studying my text once on the train and reading and studying this. Was going back and forth, and someone sitting next to me said, "Excuse me, what is that you're studying?" And I explained it. And they said it was someone who was a math student from Harvard, and they were fascinated by what I was looking at. And anyway, studied with him for 4 years in improvisation and studying composition. And then I decided, since I'm working with him here in New York, he teaches the Manhattan School of Music. Why not?
Natural progression,
sure. Be getting credit for all this work that I'm doing. Because I would go up from here in Ocean Grove on the train, or from Philadelphia, and my lessons would start maybe at 1 o'clock, and we'd be finished at 4 o'clock or 4:30, and in an unair-conditioned room in the summer. It was hot as the blazes, but we were really working. So then I went to Manhattan and did my master's and continued and did my doctorate, as you did. So
wonderful. So that took you to Manhattan School of Music. And what year did you finish your doctoral work?
What year? 1989. I remember it specifically because I bought a new car. It was an 1889. A 1989 Jetta. That was my first new car. And so I happened to get that the year that I got my doctorate.
So let's go about the beginning of the Ocean Grove job. Now, you're the second person in the 2 weeks who's told me that I expected to be here for a year, but I stayed much longer. We had Kevin Short on the program, and he said the same thing. And I told Kevin, and Kevin actually lived for a year in the house we're in right now. He stayed in this cabin for one season before he, in one of his seasons at Ocean Grove. It's a small world.
Yes.
So, what was it like when you first got to Ocean Grove? For people who may not know anything about Ocean Grove on this call, many people do, I see, but there's a lot who don't. Describe Ocean Grove.
Well, it's a seaside town. It's about a mile square. It has beautiful architecture from a century and a half ago, so that it has a great deal of charm. We're right by, obviously, at the ocean, so that's an attractive thing. And my first year here, I found time every afternoon to go to the ocean. Now I don't know how I did it.
I've been 3 times this summer.
I know. But I was doing it every day. I would get down to the ocean somehow. And the program was that we have Sunday services, morning and evening, and congregations of several thousand would come in this big auditorium, which seats 6,500.
You got a picture of it in the back there.
There it is, yes. And the program was such that we had choir rehearsal on Wednesday night, and now it's on Tuesday night, but it used to be Wednesday night. I would play a recital at 7 o'clock, and then choir rehearsal would begin at 8:15. And then Friday night rehearsal, and then Saturday I would play a recital at 4 o'clock. It's now at noon. Sunday morning service. Sunday afternoon, I would accompany a vocal concert, and then Sunday evening service. And it was that routine. It went on for 3 months that we do this, 2 months that we have the concentrated concert schedule. And in addition to that, we did some special concerts. The quartet, there was a professional vocal quartet. We've had magnificent singers and do still here. So we were doing sometimes the concert of all opera, sometimes the concert of Broadway, and then sometimes they mix it half and half, various times. And then as I got used to the schedule here, and as we started to work on things, I noticed that the organ really needed attention. They had done some mechanical work on it, and as I had said earlier, it was an interesting instrument, not really that large. It just had a large reputation historically.
So people may know that a lot of people who come and see the organ now would just always assume that the organ's always been the way it is right now.
Right.
Let's dispel that rumor. What was it like? What was the shape of the instrument when you arrived?
Well, they made it mechanically sound, so it worked. And they had added some pipes to it, but without any consideration for how these pipes were not designed to suit this big room acoustically. The cubic capacity of the room is immense. So the pipes have to be voiced so that they speak properly in this big room. Just as with the singers, we have to have singers who have voices that have the power to fill this room, apart from amplification. So we have acoustical singers and we have an acoustical instrument in the organ. There's no amplification involved in it. When I started here, the instrument had probably about 1,400 pipes, 1,400 pipes, and that may seem like a lot. It's not. It was a pretty modest sized instrument, but some of the pipes were built on an extremely large scale that really suited the room, and they were powerful in their sound. So it developed a reputation as being a powerful, magnificent
Wasn't there a
organ.
time when it was one of the largest? It was considered the largest organ in the world. It was
Well,
somewhere said that. I read a postcard or
that was postcard publicity. No truth to that rumor.
Okay,
It was just one of the loudest organs, I guess, in the world. And when I arrived here, the biggest, the loudest, the largest pipes had been removed from the organ, and
Really?
they took away the wind. The blowers, we call them the organ. The wind compressors to supply air to them was also removed, and they didn't replace it. So the organ was diminished greatly, and they added pipes to it that were pipes that were suitable for a small or average church. Well, they didn't have a chance in here, so they were doing their best to scream and make themselves heard, but it was not doing much. So then I started to talk with John Shaw, who was very interested in the instrument, who was a summer vacationer here, and who had a background in pipe organs, had grown up, was familiar with them, although he was not an organist. And he was very interested in this instrument, so he asked if I was interested. What could we talk about? Well, we started to discuss things and looked at projects and started to make a column of these are the positives, these are the negatives.
What year would this have been around? What time period was this?
This was the first year I came here.
Okay,
We
right from the
started
beginning.
right away at the end of that season to begin to these discussions in 1974. And then we started to work what might be feasible. Well, we started out by him saying, I would like to make a gift, a donation to the organ that will make it possible to put in some significant pipes, trumpet pipes in this case. He said, in memory of my father. Oh. So that was the first project that we did, and I thought, this is magnificent. The organ has never sounded so grand and so good, but that was only the beginning. Then we started work, and he became more involved in the project and was actually appointed the curator of the organ, and he was a trustee, was also appointed a trustee of the organization. So he was able to, even though still this was avocational, his vocation was really in public education. He was a school administrator, superintendent, and director of facilities, things in his entire career. When he retired from that, he devoted his full time to working as the, again, avocational curator of the organ. In the meantime, we had been working, and people noticed it. People became interested, and other people come up and said, I would like to give a donation to the organ in memory of my Aunt Virginia, or my father or my mother. What are the possibilities? So we began to find that people were interested in funding projects because it's very costly, and we began working. And one of the things we did was started to install we created an organ endowment fund. So which is healthy, which is to promote the future life of the organ. Good. So that there's always something there to help not pay the organist or do normal operational tuning, which the Ocean Grove budget pays for, but to know that there's security there for emergency situations and to help the instrument. So over the years, it has grown from this sort of measly 1,400 pipes to over 13,000. And that is colossal.
And people heard it on the introduction. They heard the organ playing with an orchestra, how a magnificent sound, it fills the room, and it's got such incredible tonal possibilities at the moment.
Well, just last week, a sound engineer, a recording engineer, who worked on the first recording that I did here, which was issued in 1999, Dorian Recordings, and they did a beautiful job, and we recorded the instrument. He was here in '99. He came here this week, rather last week, and to hear the organ, and he's interested in doing another recording. Well, in the meantime, we've done other recording projects, but he's interested in the recording possibilities with this instrument. And he said, I can't believe it. This is a different instrument. Well, it has grown exponentially in the past 20 years, both in terms of versatility, quality, refinement, sophistication. But there's always been a master plan that I've been working with so that it has a tonal design and an idea. And today I played two compositions by Buxtehude. And years ago, and I said, one person came up to me after recital and said, oh, that Buxtehude is magnificent. I'm so glad to hear it. And I said, well, several years ago, people would have laughed if you said, play Buxtehude in Ocean Grove with the organ. That's a big, fat, romantic organ. Doesn't do anything but that. It has an astounding array of ensembles that are that reflect the literature and the classic organ construction of the past 500 years. So it's not exhaustive, it's not totally complete, but it's a magnificent instrument which has its own musical personality, but it's able to play the music of Bach. And this past week I played a couple works of Bach. I played two large works of Buxtehude, played Mozart, played Widor, and played Vierne, all the classic things of organ literature, plus some classic, we were discussing earlier, some contemporary English composers, Greystone Ives, John Cook, and others. And so these are all things the organ can play Messiaen. So
it gives you such incredible possibilities. And now I'd say of all the great artists I know, you're one of the only people, as far as organist, who's actually made that type of impact on the instrument you work with.
I think I've been really fortunate, and that's the reason I've stayed here so long, because the instrument and I have been able to grow together, and I've been very fortunate that I think Ocean Grove is fortunate that we've been able to develop the organ and to see it grow. And John Shaw, who was the curator, and I have worked step by step by step, always keeping a kind of master plan in mind, although we had to do it in very small increments. One of the things that's unique about this place is that the season is in the summer for 3 months, then the building is put into mothballs, as it were, for the winter. The organ stays where it is, but we have worked over the years to see that it's in a stable condition in terms of the walls around it, the ceilings above it, so that it's protected during the winter, because this building was built for summer use and it's not a winterized building. So that's been another part of the whole process.
People ask me all the time, how do you winterize an organ?
Yeah. And it used to be that we had to cover large sections of it with plastic drop cloths and with canvas cloths and try to make sure that the walls around them were as secure as possible. Well, John was very interested. He's very capable of working with architects and with construction people, and he can communicate and tell them what we need to do. And over the years, they have made those sections around and above the organ more and more stable, and that there are always things to be conscious of, but we're always working.
When I first came to Ocean Grove, I got to walk through the organ quite a bit just to see this magnificent, just to see the physical construction of it. It was just so impressive. It's like 2 stories down from the floor level.
Below
the
floor
pipes
level,
go down there,
and it goes a couple stories above floor level. So
I took my children when they were kids to look at the construction and to see the different shapes of the pipes and the reed pipes and the trumpet pipes. Just fascinating to see the.
Some are wood and some are metal, and as you say, different shapes. We have several that are 32 feet in height, and one pipe that weighs a ton. It's so massive, the biggest pipe in the organ, and they're of course very low frequencies. And that's one of the aspects of the reputation of the organ, is that it has this incredible bass sonority,
which they heard at the beginning, and they're going to hear at the end as well.
But it's also amongst organists who come that they're delighted with the array of soft sounds so many combinations of elegant ethereal sounds that the average organ might have maybe 5 or 6 such stops if they're fortunate. Most organs maybe 2 or 4, maybe 5 or 6 such stops, and we have 51 such possibilities in the organ.
I've never seen an organist who has such control over the of the registration. That's something I watch you when you rehearse and you practice. You must take, when you do a recital, how do you set registration? I mean, what part of it is knowing the instrument, knowing the capabilities, and then how do you register?
Well, that's a very insightful question, because people don't think about that. And when a pianist goes somewhere, they have a chance. They know they're going to see 88 keys. They're going to be black and white. It's going to say Steinway on it, or something like that. And they just have to get used, and they want to know what the action is going to be like. When you go to the organ, every instrument is entirely different. So when you have elements of the action, the key action being different, the pedal action being different, but a different array of pipes that we call stops that are there, and you have to know how to combine them and make this work. There are certain fundamentals as you go from instrument to instrument, but it's not like buying a car where every Buick is a Buick. It's that every pipe organ has something individual and different about it from every other pipe organ that's been built. And that's one of the reasons I'm so interested in the instrument, and why it's kept my interest for so long. Because I'm not a mechanically inclined person, but the personality, the mechanical possibilities of the instrument itself are so unique that it's been stimulating and interesting to me. So when I have a recital schedule, I always schedule at least, at a minimum, 3 days of practice before the day of the recital, and I like generally try to get 4 days in. And at which I go to the organ. The first thing I do is sit down and I listen to every single stop on the organ, and then I quickly sense what stops are going to work in combination with others, because I've had the experience of doing this. But I also try, if I'm given the opportunity, to actually go behind the facade of the organ, so that and look and see where the pipes are located, because I like to have a sense of knowing, okay, this flute is here, so if I'm using it in relation to this oboe, which is over here, I know where they are, and it gives me another sense of contact with the instrument, so that rather than just playing it from out here and not knowing what's going on inside.
And with the echo division in the back of the instrument that was put in my first year, I believe, I mean, that gives you even more spatial possibility. And like today, there was, I don't think I've ever heard the flugelhorn stops that we heard today in your recital. And it sounded like a French horn. It could have been like... I literally turned around. I'm like, that sounds exactly like a played French horn.
That's our new French horn stop that went in just last summer.
I've never heard that sound before. Am I crazy?
Yeah, no, you're listening, because French horn stops are one of the hardest stops to have built for an organ. And we tried a couple of vintage ranks here at various times, and we had some in there that we thought would be impressive, and they would be working.
That
They
could have
never
been
were.
an actual French horn. So the register where like the French, that could have been a player. I'm like what?
But then I spent a lot of time talking to different organ builders and organ technicians about building a French horn, and we did a lot of research. And then it was last summer when this French horn went in. So, and the $1 million range of it is that range that's like the orchestral French horn. There are pipes for every note on the keyboard, but it's that baritone, tenor, mezzo area that is the golden, the sweet spot. That's and what I was playing today. I was using that, and it.
So that moment, it must have been the. Was it the?
I was using it in the Debussy,
right.
transcription.
So when you see that Debussy transcription, was it written to use those pipes, or did you choose that stop and you thought that would?
No, it was actually the transcription isn't written either.
Okay.
I was using a piano version that someone had done of that piece, and then I transcribed it, and I wanted to try to do it in a way that I could honor the vocal line and the accompaniments, and then part of the time, in one half of it, that I was using that baritone tenor register of the French horn of the vocal line, and that was on the French horn.
Interesting. I'm always fascinated by registration. I work with a lot of organists, and when I do, it's common with organists. Like organists cover the choir, in my experience. Never with you. You've never, in the 14 years we worked together, I've never heard you overbalance on a singer or overbalance a choir. And that's such a testament to your ability to hear and to choose such interesting timbres.
Well, that's part of it. And the fact is that I enjoy working with singers and choral groups. And I'm just a thrill of all these people in front of you singing. And you want to give them support and encourage them in every way. And it's also... I have to say, it's a testimony to this instrument. It has the most marvelous accompanying abilities when you know how to use them. And that was one of the things that has been one of our guiding lines as we've gone through this, our emphasis on how it can increase the versatility for accompaniment of individual singers and of choral singers, because that's its most important role. Here is accompanying congregational singing.
Big part of the...
And this organ can do it in a way that's more thrilling, I think, than just about any organ I've heard.
And people like Joseph Martin's like, there's nothing like the hymn singing at Ocean Grove. Every time I see him at the National Conference, he's like, come over here. There's nothing like the hymn singing at Ocean Grove.
It is.
And I agree.
Yeah. Well, that's part of our history and our heritage. And in this pandemic time, it's the thing that
we miss the most. We're all killed.
That just missed the congregational singing and the choirs. And of course individual singing. So
let's talk about the COVID period. I was just telling Gordon before we began the show that I think the only place in the country or in the world that's doing full recitals. Gordon's done his full recital series of 2 recitals a week.
Yeah.
We've allowed 100 people in the building, so you've maintained your schedule. What's it like to play recitals in this time period?
I feel grateful that we can do it. You work with singers and choral singers, and I can't imagine how frustrating it is for you to not have people live in front of you. Well, you're coping.
I can tell you about this. Every time you've done a recital, I go in there and I cry in the back because I just haven't heard live music in ages, and it's just devastating.
Some organists came from New York, and they came down and they said, "You're the only show in town." They said no one's doing anything anywhere, and it's very humbling. I mean, to think it's that we can actually have an instrument that's so magnificent and we can still play. And I had said at the beginning, I'm glad it didn't come to this, but I had determined that if push came to shove and we weren't allowed to have people inside the building, well, this building being what it has all these sliding doors and pocket windows, I said Wednesday nights and Saturdays, I'm just going to have all the windows open, all the doors open, and play the recital just let it go out into and that. So last Wednesday night we had people sitting outside.
Oh yeah.
Lots of them in chairs, and as we can have 100 in the building, which is, go figure. The building seats 6,000.
It's an outdoor venue with the wind going right through.
Right, so anyway, I'm just so glad that we've been able to do this and to present this, because so many people have said, this has been my hook. It's been keeping me going this summer.
Yeah.
It's the only normal aspect of the summer.
This is one of the most challenging things about this whole COVID-19 pandemic, is that when we need music the most, we can't make it.
Yes.
We're all separated and isolated.
Yeah.
And I've been on this call. That's the reason I started this podcast, was just because I'm not performing. I'm not making music. I just feel like, so I was supposed to be making a debut in Vienna, in Prague, and doing a tour with my choir this period, and doing a thing in Italy, and it was all grounded and halted.
Yeah.
And so I said, I have all this free time now that I'm usually studying scores and getting ready to do all these concerts, and we've had to rethink everything.
Well, you'll remember after the experience of 9/11, people were performing music everywhere as a response to that.
Of course.
Which is a natural outpouring of emotion and support for everyone. And we can't do that now. People can't gather, and it's just such a different situation, and it's very painful. And in addition to that, think of all the singers that you know who are out of work, all of the instrumentalists who at this point in time are out of work. I mean, the Metropolitan Opera of all places, the orchestra, the Philadelphia Orchestra,
yeah.
Broadway, all of the orchestras that are silent at this time, and you just hope that they can hang on financially.
Before the season started, I reached out to some people here. I said, "Could you please look in the minutes for the Spanish flu? I'm just curious what they did back then, because that's the only thing I can even think be even close to this."
Yeah.
And but I discovered that in that pandemic, they didn't cancel a single performance of the Metropolitan Opera.
Huh.
Not a single one was canceled due to that pandemic. Now maybe that's why 50 million people died. Who knows? But I mean, it's just fascinating to me. Like, how did they function? How did they get through this? Because what a unique time we're in. And I just it's going to change things forever. Like,
I remember talking to one man. He was in his 90s when I talked to him 35 years ago, and he went through the Spanish flu, and he said he had it, and
wow.
He said that they said, you stay in bed. They did whatever they could medically for them, but they said you stay in bed. You do not get up. Said if you put one foot on the floor, you're dead. And he said that's, people try to get up and do things, and bang, it was such that I guess there was little medicine for that flu, but one of the things it required was bed rest, and it was pretty severe. So there are things that we have to consider now, and that has to do with how people congregate and interact, and the mask business, and everything.
Yeah, it's going to change things for a long time. We both work in education, and I know I'm getting ready to teach on Monday. I'm going to teach live. I've been teaching remote for a week now. I go live. I've got to teach my lecture course. There's no choirs and orchestra will both be remote this semester, and totally transformed into something new and in a very different. So I'm getting my head around that, because I've been doing it all summer here. But now I'm getting ready to teach a lecture course in front of students, so I have to be in front of a plexiglass shield. And one third of my class will be in rotating in the room, a large room spaced out, and then 2/3 will be remote. It's going to be a unique challenge.
Yeah,
and I'm
it's a
learning
challenge for the student too.
I think it is,
and we have to be sort of sympathetic to that, or empathetic to that. And I'll be starting, but I will be teaching one-on-one with organ students, grad students, and the past 5 months it's been doing it via computer and telephone. And there's only so much you can do. For example, a student of mine who played a wonderful recital here weeks ago, a week ago, I was a young fellow. We've had to do it in a way that when he's doing having the lessons remote, I could only see his hands. I couldn't see his feet. And I thought, oh, there are much better ways to pedal that thing. If I could have seen his feet and known. So we're going to be starting in-person lessons. He's still at high school level, but we're going to be starting in-person lessons, and that's one of the first things that are going to be addressed.
No.
I'll be distance, but I'll be able to see him.
One thing about teaching, Gordon, I imagine you're a wonderful teacher. I imagine you just have a great passion for this. What's it like working with a talented young person like that? And what's it like watching them have their first experience or second experience on this master organ?
Well, they have to have a lot of experience before they are given the privilege of playing an instrument like this. But it's good. Challenging the students is one thing. They challenge us, the teachers.
Absolutely.
And you learn a lot from the experience of teaching. I can't think of any student that I've worked with, regardless of whether they were mediocre or really good or superb, that there isn't something that I don't learn from working with them and teaching. And even teaching repertoire that I've taught to the same repertoire to various students, I'm still always learning something new. And that's also, as a musician, one of the things that I find stimulating. How can you keep playing some of the same pieces over and over, or conducting them? Every time you go back to them,
totally different.
You learn something, and you see different things. And I'm always fascinated with the architecture of music and how it's put together. And the more you know about how it's put together, the more you can you respond to the music and you can interpret. And there's so many things. For example, one thing I wanted to tell the audience today when I was playing a piece by a contemporary British composer, Grayston Ives, that one of the things that's attractive and makes it easy to listen to this piece is that there are there are three ideas that are set out. One is the introduction, and then in the body of the piece, there are two distinct ideas. One is very rhythmic, and one is more melodic, and they're juxtaposed against each other. But the thing that's interesting, and I would like to have had the time to tell the audience, is that, okay, here's the rhythmic thing. That's very easy to understand. Here's the melodic thing. That by itself is easy to understand. But listen to how they are put next to each other, and that as you go through the piece, they're being condensed and they're coming closer and closer together, and they're starting to merge. And that was the thing that made the piece interesting.
The audience loves the fact that you explained the piece. You have such a great way of explaining things in these recitals, because you do an incredible variety of repertoire in your recitals, and you do twice a week. When I explain this to colleagues anywhere else, like, how many? Like, he does 2 recitals a week. No one else does that I know almost anywhere.
No, I must admit, it's exhausting. But I can't stop and think about that, or I won't be able to keep going and doing it. At the same time, it's exciting and it's inspiring, and I think, before the season ends, I want to be able to get this piece in. Oh, there are too many things. I have to leave this out this year. Because another good thing about it is that during this COVID time, because we're in isolation and other activities are curtailed, I spent more time by myself learning new literature. So I was playing new pieces this year in addition to pieces that I've played many times before. So that's one way of making a positive use of the time. And it's something we should be doing all the time anyway. But
we have more time for it now, certainly.
Yes.
All my conductor colleagues are digging into repertoire they've never even touched, and
exactly.
We're all doing a lot of that now.
Yeah.
And dreaming about these pieces when we get to make them come alive.
Yeah.
One thing I've missed this year, and then all of the musicians in the orchestra who play the Summer Stars finale have reached out to me and they're like, "We miss playing at Ocean Grove," because I mean, it's such a unique experience for all of us, because to get to do this repertoire that we've done here now for many years, to get to do some of these pieces, they're so unusual.
That's one of the most stimulating and unique aspects about the work that you and I do here, that we can collaborate on this, and we're fortunate that we know such wonderful orchestral musicians, for one thing, and that they're in the proximity, and that you have contacts as a conductor with groups already that you're conducting, and that we know wonderful musicians. We put them together. We're able to present orchestral programs with organ that other people just dream about, or have only read about, or have only heard on CDs. And we have done more performances of repertoire that people don't know as well as have heard. Classics, but we've explored so many other things.
Oh, the Ives organ concerto, the Bossi organ concerto. I have never even heard of these, not the Ives, the Parker.
The
Horatio
Parker. Right. Yeah.
Just great repertoire that deserves to be heard. And this is one of the places where it's being performed, one in the world. I mean, I know that it hasn't been done very often because the rental scores, when they come, are almost never opened.
Right.
And they're very old rental scores.
And we find things that haven't been used for 50 years or something.
A concert
or
program
ever.
sneaks in the part somewhere.
If it's one case in point was the Horatio Parker Concerto. I think that, and it came from a rental library. I don't think it had been used since 1934 or something like that.
That's a great piece of music.
And it's magnificent. My favorite part is that second movement. It's actually the second part of the first
with the
movement.
solo instruments.
The solo instruments. It sounds like Richard Strauss and Mahler and and Wagner, and it's just a beautiful. The last movement is very Wagnerian. The opening is Wagnerian, and then this incredible with the harp, French horn, and violin solos, and it's the sort of thing that would make Mahler weep. It's so beautiful, and then the organ is a part of that all the way through. And then the third movement on it is very much like a early 20th century French scherzo for the organ and timpani. I mean, who would ever heard of such a? They're the two doing most. Then the strings come in.
Poulenc heard of
and then Poulenc has heard of that. So.
That repertoire is so unique because the idea of an organ and an orchestra, the organ is really its own symphony, and then you add a symphony.
It's a symphonic instrument.
Fascinating. As a thinking as a composer, you get this limitless possibilities. It's almost like two separate worlds that come together, and you can.
Well, that's an example. Horatio Parker. Maybe it's some names beginning with P. Parker is able to have the organ meld with the orchestra in a symphonic way. Poulenc is an incredible craftsman, and he is able to use the instrument and he uses it in an entirely different way.
Totally unique.
It's so unusual, and he's able to make the instrument speak with integrity and the orchestra speak in the unique and wonderful way that he has of crafting his compositions. It's
usually
wonderful.
when we do these concertos, they're heavily scored pieces because the organ can really make a lot of sound. Poulenc goes the opposite. He uses big, but he only has strings and timpani.
Yes,
a fascinating choice.
And then the organ has the gamut of things from brilliant sounds to very delicate ethereal sounds to sounds that are sparkling Baroque-like sounds. When he wrote that piece, he wasn't an organist, but he was a craftsman as a composer, and he wrote the music, and then he asked Maurice Duruflé to register to what stops would be appropriate to use for this. So Duruflé then helped him with the registrational aspects of it, but he knew what sonorities he wanted.
It's not dissimilar to like Tchaikovsky would go with a great violinist and ask him, "Is this possible?" He would ask him. He would have play through the passage work and say, "What would you suggest on this type of passage work?"
Right.
Yeah, interesting. It always takes composers who don't play that instrument. It's always interesting as they adapt and they try to custom tailor the technique to see what works best for the virtuoso playing it.
Yeah, I think the Howard Hanson piece is so interesting the way, again, sonorities of the orchestra, the way he combines various solo parts, solo instruments of the orchestra with solo stops of the organ. And but I think one of the granddaddies of them all is when we have done the Jongen. That has, again, there are parts there where one organ builder at one time we were doing actually said, at one part, was that the organ playing or was that the orchestra? Where he has woodwind sounds of the orchestra and woodwind sounds of the organ. And
that's probably the most organic melding of the two.
Yes.
The Jongen as it's almost a symphony. It's just incredible. That work, powerful. The ending is just, knock your socks off.
Yeah.
We've got recordings of that, and the recording we have of that, the end of it, my son put the camera up. He gave the maestro views in the back, looking down at the conductor, and the whole camera starts to shake when you kick on the 32 foot. It's pretty exciting. It makes it even more exciting because you feel that in your body when you hear those sounds in that space.
Yeah, and that's one of the unique things about this space too, the auditorium itself, the combination of the organ and the building and how they resonate.
We have a question from the audience. Now, you've played the Wanamaker organ, which is the largest organ in the world. What's it like to play that instrument as opposed to the Great Auditorium organ?
They're two very different animals. Interesting. Somebody asked me that today after the recital. I've played the Wanamaker organ many times, and it's a wonderful instrument. It has a very different color, I will say. And timbre. It was built during a period in which people were particularly interested in playing orchestral transcriptions. So it's the last word, the most unique instrument for playing orchestral transcriptions. For example, Peter Conti, who is the organist, does a great transcription of Candide. You were talking about the overture to Candide. And this organ plays it brilliantly. It's like whole sections of strings and of woodwinds and of brass, and it's put together that way. This instrument is built on the more European classic model of how an organ is built for an ensemble that plays knowing that the roots of the organ are in contrapuntal music. So it's a whole different idea in terms of sound construction.
Interesting.
But then as we advance through musical history and you come into the 19th century, well, the organs and also the organ builders began to absorb aspects of orchestral things into them, their instruments. And you see unique characters of personalities between the German, the French, and the English organs particularly, and then the Americans, which is a synthesis of various of these things. This organ is one that has elements you can play any of the literature, and frequently people reject that as a philosophy. They say, if it can play any literature, it means it plays nothing well. Not the case. Because we have all the classic Bach plenums available. So going back to the Wanamaker organ, it's built along the lines of especially wonderful playing of orchestral transcriptions, and that's where its real personality is.
And the Jongen was originally written for that organ, correct?
Yes, it was.
That's right.
However, I think it wasn't performed
until much later.
I don't know how many
Why
years
did they
later.
build that organ in the Wanamaker department store in Philadelphia? Why was that chosen as a venue to build a magnificent pipe organ?
Well, Rodman Wanamaker, who built the store, was interested in having an organ in the store. And it was that period of time, but we're talking about 1910 and 11, when people were more tuned into things like that, the acoustical music as opposed to recorded music. And they... organ itself, the original part of the instrument, was built for the St. Louis Exposition in 1904. Or it was 1890 something or 1904, I can't remember which. And it was an organ that was there at that exposition and played daily. And Rodman Wanamaker heard about it, saw it, heard it, evidently said, I want that for our store. And he bought it. It came on, it was a large instrument, but only a fraction of what it is now. And then it came in several, I forget, like 8 carloads. The thing was shipped from here, and then they began to assemble it in the store. And once he did that, he decided that we need more of this and more of that. And they have an organ shop there, and they began building things, and the organ was enlarged and enlarged and enlarged. And it would be even larger than it is now if he had lived a little longer, because he had a contract on his desk ready to sign for another division that was to be added to the organ.
And I'm sure the person after that's like, oh, let's direct those funds somewhere else. Well, it must be incredible to maintain that instrument.
Yes, but it's maintained beautifully.
Good.
And it's a tribute to the store that they supported. That's Macy's.
Now, Philadelphia has always been an epicenter of the arts in America, especially with the Curtis Institute, with the Academy of Vocal Arts, all these incredible training institutes, and the Philadelphia Orchestra.
The Philadelphia Orchestra there.
Always.
Yeah. So that's been a great source.
Are you from Philadelphia originally, the area?
No, I'm actually from New Jersey, and I lived in Lambertville when I was a kid.
Okay.
Little community, little town. But we moved frequently. As I said, my father was a minister, so we moved from one place to another. And so I had to adapt in schools and in finding organ teachers, etc. But I was very fortunate in finding one in Lambertville who became my primary teacher until I went to McCurdy. And she prepared me. She didn't know she was doing that, but it was through her that I was prepared to be able to study with Alexander McCurdy later. So, and I've had 2 influential teachers, apart from, she was my wonderful preparation. McCurdy himself, when I was in high school, and then again at Curtis. Then later, when I was studying with McNeill Robinson, he was so different, a teacher and personality. And where McCurdy taught through suggestions, and he would get down to particular things, and as well. But he taught through a broad sweeping gesture, as it were, and ideas and how to communicate these ideas. When I was studying McNeill Robinson, he was intensely focused on, here are Baroque performance practices, here are the French performance practices,
right.
And really specific things. And then I started investigating things sort of from the scholarly end of things and becoming really interested in that. And at the same time, I was working with him in terms of compositional studies. So the approach was really different, and I began to investigate things from the inside of the composition.
Have your mentors gotten to see you play here at Ocean Grove? Have your mentors gotten to see you play at Ocean Grove?
No, both of them are deceased. Although McCurdy came here a couple of years after I had been here. He heard about the work that was going on with the organ. So about 5 or 6 years later, after he came to hear it and to see me and to hear me with this instrument. And
what was that like, to have one of your mentors right there?
Well, he was. Actually, it wasn't a public performance. It was a private thing. He came from Philadelphia. We set up one of the big chairs on the platform, and I said, "Okay, I'm going to play." I played. I remember. I think it was the Bach Toccata and Fugue in D minor, which is a funny choice to play because that's a youthful piece, but it demonstrated the organ so dramatically. And then I played the litanies of Alain, and some other things. And then we were talking about the organ, and he was thrilled with the experience of how the organ was evolving, and that was only in the very, very early days of it. Later, I do have to say, McNeill Robinson heard me. As a matter of fact, the first time I ever played the Symphony Concertante by Jongen, it was an orchestra. Thomas Mahalik was the conductor, and it was the Cathedral Orchestra from Newark. Cathedral played, and so McNeill Robinson did come to that concert, and I played a Handel concerto in the program, and then
That's a strange pairing of repertoire. Tiny and then
the expansiveness of
I mean,
it.
how big an orchestra would Handel have had when he done his concerti between the acts of his oratorios?
Oh well, yeah. With
What
Handel,
would he have used?
he had violins and oboes and bassoons.
But for the organ, what would the organ have been?
They had only small instruments, and the Handelian instruments, we'll call them, the instruments of his time. They were small pipe organs. They were mostly what we would consider chamber organs, but they didn't have pedals at that time. They had rarely. There was only one instrument that wasn't in a church. Most of when Handel was conducting, there were oratorio performances, and they were mostly in theaters or opera houses in England. And there was a theater in Lincoln, the city of Lincoln, which had an organ that had a pedal board, and that was one of the very few during his time that had anything. And usually Handel would sit at the console, and he wrote these things out at a furious rate. And he'd write the first violin part and the second violin part and the cello part, everything. And then he would fill the organ part. He would extemporize a lot of it while he was doing it. He just wrote in. He would play from a figured bass, and he had the orchestra parts written out for the players and the oboes and bassoons. But much of the thing he would extemporize, and then he would fill it in later.
And that became a selling point to go to these oratorios, was to hear the maestro premiere an organ concerto. That became a ticket.
Yeah, between first and second acts of Samson or of Messiah, whatever, hear Handel play a new concerto. He wrote about 16 or 17 of these. Most of them aren't well known.
Isn't it delightful to dig into the repertoire deeper than like normally we do?
Oh yeah.
I think it's. I never get as a conductor. My favorite thing in the world is to study. At 3 a.m. is to dig out the repertoire. How come the early Tchaikovsky stuff or something I'd never done before, then just explore. And I think that curiosity is one of my favorite things, is to spend that time digging.
Well, I'm reading a textbook right now that I've been reading this summer. It's a slow process. It's not a quick read, but it's called Time, Music, and Theology, and it's talking about time in terms of interstellar space. And then talking about time as a temporal thing that we live within the confines or within the parameters of time, and is also talking about time in music and how time passes. There's a lot of philosophical and scientific discussion about past, present, and future. And in music, of course, we're talking much of the time about, no pun intended, much of the time about resolution. Music is always moving towards the resolution, until you get to music that's what we might call atonal or polytonal, in which resolution is not a figure of it, or some of the contemporary music.
Minimalism, for sure.
Absolutely.
What he does without no conflict.
Well, I was just going to mention John Tavener.
Sure.
And Arvo Pärt, certainly. And they're people who have the ability, through the music they're doing, to sort of suspend time, and they're not confined to music being that it has an immediate past and that you're always anticipating the future. They have music of which it is. You just are. Time is suspended, and
I love the minimalists. It just speaks to me more and more as I get a little older and a little more experienced. At first, it was like, I don't know, but Pärt just speaks to me in a way that very few composers. It's so heartfelt and so spiritual that just grabs me. And every time I hear a Pärt piece, it's like it can be Spiegel in Spiegel, Mirror in the Mirror, and this. I could just sit there for the 3 hours listening to that music. It just grabs me.
Yeah.
He doesn't need to have that sweeping arc.
No, but I find there's a part of me that still needs that sweeping arc.
Oh, sometimes, yeah.
I couldn't do it all the time,
Yeah,
but I am fascinated with Tavener's music and Arvo Pärt. I've performed the Stabat Mater.
Now that piece is just
times,
that opening and it's very difficult for the string players. It sits in the absolute stratosphere.
Yes.
And then the chorus comes in with this beautiful, almost like Renaissance tapestry.
Well, the first time I heard it was on a radio. It was recording, and I thought, that's the most beautiful Renaissance music I've ever heard. For about 5 seconds. I thought,
Like,
boy,
what?
where is that
That's
going? What are they
odd.
doing? It's magnificent.
Yeah, I did it with my university choir for our Lenten meditation, and luckily I've got some people who really like contemporary music. They're like, "That's not Victoria." Or
Have you done his Beatitudes?
I've
for
heard it,
chorus?
I've sung it, I've never conducted it.
Yeah, that's and then it has that crazy organ postlude. I mean, the piece ends. You think that's the end of everything. The text has ended. The singers have finished. And then there's this crazy organ, almost like a toccata, that goes on for about
We have a
45
question.
seconds.
Who wrote Time, Music, and Theology? This is Reverend Grace from Florida. She says hello.
Jeremy Begbie, Begbie. It's published by Cambridge University Press, and he teaches at Duke University. He's an interesting person.
Now, you're an avid reader. I know we talk about books all the time. So what do you enjoy reading when you're not doing music?
I enjoy fiction. I enjoy reading history, and I right at the moment I'm reading that book by Begbie, which is quite a book. I'm reading a book called Madame Fourcade's Secret War. It's about a woman who, during the Second World War in France, had formed the most effective espionage organization that exists, and she was never given credit for it. She helped what she did for France and for Great Britain through this espionage work was one of the things that helped the Allies win the war.
Amazing.
And so recently a book was written by Lynn Olson, who's a wonderful writer. I read another book of hers that was called Last Hope Island, about Britain during the Second World War. It's a brilliant essay on the interaction of all of Europe and what people were experiencing. And she mentioned this woman, Madame Fourcade. And then I found this book that she's just recently written about her. It's only a couple of years old, just came out, and about her in espionage. I'm doing that. I'm reading Tolkien's The Lord of the Ring again, The Hobbit. I love it. I've read it, I think, 34 times, the whole thing.
It never gets old. It's a masterpiece.
Never gets old.
Our cameraman Quentin's a big fan as well.
Good. It's just incredible. And it's one of those things, it's like a wonderful, a really fine piece of music in which you understand it at different levels.
As you read it different times in your life, it's totally different.
It's intellectual, it's emotional, or you see it for this certain period and style of the poetry, or you read it
There's
just
so
for
much music in that
the
book,
action
those
of
books
the
too.
book.
So much music, like the way he thinks, and
Oh yes, and there's also so much theology in the book. It's very powerful.
Interesting.
So
And now let's we're getting to the end of our show. Tell me about what advice you have for young musicians coming up today. In your vast experience in the field and your journey as an artist, what do you have to say to young artists who are coming up?
I'm not being corny about this, but two words that start with P come up right to mind. One is perseverance. The other is patience. That's an important part of the learning process of any repertoire that you're learning, of any musical skill that you're developing. And then this whole business of the computers, it's so different today. There's so many different and new things to learn. It can take you often to an entirely different aspect of a career, or it can be a reality of going to school, and at this point it certainly is, or it can be a type of music that you become very interested in this sort of thing. When you look back historically, history. Another thing is become involved in history. The history of the world, the history of music, the history of people. It's all tied together.
I say this to all of my students, and I say this to them, like, music is an amber that captures whatever is going on in society. So in order to understand music, you have to understand what was going on in politics, history, music. Who did the composer know? What artists were they friends with? It's so important to knowing the music.
Right. Going back to history, when Bach worked at the court in Curtin, he was always anxious to know anyone who came to court from different parts of Europe.
Of course.
Oh, show me the music. What do they do? What are they doing in Italy? What are they doing in France? What are they doing in Germany? In wherever. And he absorbed elements of this, but one has to admit that he not only absorbed, he redefined it, mastered it, and it came out more. He was Bach, Mozart, Beethoven were just incredible experiences in all of creation, their minds and what they've produced. And there are others who are superb and wonderful that I want to name, but those three are just so unique. But the more you learn about history and about people, the more you are able to respond to the world around you. The other day I saw a movie a rerun of a movie on television called Hidden Figures.
Love that movie.
Isn't that wonderful
film.
music?
Great film.
Well, it's so appropriate for today. It's about history in the 1960s as far as the period of time. But the thing that's so great about it is this is about African American women who are working in jobs. It's about segregation, and it's about integration, and it's about some women who had incredible minds, and they were brilliant, and they applied themselves to the situations around them, and they became important people in this space program with NASA.
Brilliant minds in the country, right? I mean,
yes.
To be.
And these are people who have contributed something to the country and the people around them. And it's as opposed to simply demanding that I want this position, I want this for my life, I want that for my life, and I go at it and grab and get it. These are people who contributed in an incredible way, and they stuck to it. I would have to say they had patience and perseverance.
No.
They were brilliant.
I hear stories like that. You know, they have so much to teach us about today when we're in these challenging times in America. When you see something like that and you see people achieving despite enormous odds, it just there's hope for us. We just have to be more human and
that's why
listen to each other.
It's so important to be open to what people are doing, where they are, and different nationalities and different periods of time in history. For one reason, so we don't repeat the same mistakes, but you can learn from it, and it's in music is an incredibly international thing. And what we've been talking about is primarily Western music. There's a lot beyond that. Of
course. We make our careers in Western music, but I'm always fascinated. Whenever I go to another country, I love to see the folk music of the country. When I was training in Romania, watching the Romanian string players are stunningly good. But then I got to hear their folk music, which is all virtuosic string playing. Like, no wonder these orchestras are so phenomenal when they play Beethoven or Mozart. It's just they've been doing that since they're small kids. They've been playing those string figurations, and it's just they grew up with it. It's just whenever I do an opera, I'm always amazed by the international nature of the cast. Every single cast is going to be from 5 different countries, and we always have such great stories to tell, because as soon as we make music together, there's no divisions.
Right.
Political divisions disappear when music is on the stand. It's pretty amazing how that works.
Mm-hmm. It's because music is such a fundamental part of the human soul, that you're touching something that's inside and that's unique and brings people together.
Well, Gordon Turk, it's been a pleasure to have this conversation. We could go for another 3 hours, but
we have been going on.
We have church in the morning, and we got to back to our and a virtual choir festival in the evening. That'll be something new and exciting for us.
Well, with these experiences and the fact that we share musical opportunities, it just provides the opportunity. It's easy to converse. Yep. You don't have
This
to
is like after rehearsal. We usually do this anyway.
Yeah, you don't have to have a written agenda. I mean, it flows, and we're just scratching the surface.
I know it. We'll do it again sometime.
Okay.
Thank you so much for joining us on Music Matters 2020. Wish you the best. And please remember to subscribe to us on YouTube and hit that button. And for the most up-to-date information on upcoming guests and topics, we have 2 guests next week, including Mark Delavan, a leading figure in the opera world for many years. That's next Saturday. And thank you so much. We have a famous voice, a very, very up-and-coming voice therapist who works for a lot of opera singers and Broadway people on Thursday, Christine Moore, who is a wonderful, someone I went to college with and having a great career. So hope you can join us. Remember to check out our past episodes on our website at jasontramm.net. We have 40 episodes to choose from, artists from a sitar player and an air hoop player to organists and just virtuosos in many different fields. So thank you for joining us, and remember, keep music alive. you.